Hello and welcome to Straight Talk with PC. Today, of course, we are going to be talking about how Gen Z and the protesters on the streets of Delhi, Mumbai, and various other parts of the country forced the resignation of India's education minister, perhaps a first union cabinet minister stepping down because of the demands of the Gen Z and in the Bharatiya Janata Party government ever since they came to power in 2014. The other part I'm going to talk to you about is the history of student protests, which forced the government to understand, to hear, and also to implement the changes that the students were seeking. I'll do a deep dive on how Mandal Commission report, which was accepted and brought in a 27% OBC reservation, led to a whole set of student protests under the VP Singh government, which was supported from the outside by the Bharatiya Janata Party, led to a student movement with over 60 students dead and over 200 trying self-immolation. I personally believe this changed how the country would face the development issues of the country, the youth issues of the country, and perhaps the direction the country moved into. Having said that, the one most important part after the resignation of Dharmendra Pradhan, and which people are talking about, and the students and even the Gen X and whichever generation you want to speak about, the tax-paying generation, is categorically saying that we need to be heard on the E20 issues that they are facing. Lots of people have been speaking about it, they have been protesting about it, and they continue with their protests while the government pays no heed. Will the momentum of protests lead to perhaps another resignation or a policy decision which the people of the country expect from its government? All this and more on Straight Talk with PC. Today, of course, we are going to be speaking about the resignation of Education Minister. On Saturday afternoon, I'll call it historic, something historic happened. Dharmendra Pradhan resigned as India's Education Minister. Reason I call it historic? Because Gen Z managed to do something for the first time in the 12 years of Prime Minister Modi's leadership. Think about it. This government rarely gives in to ministerial exit demands. We've been asking for it, ask me. But this time, they had no choice. Gen Z forced this exit. After weeks of relentless protests over the massive NEET exam leaks, the pressure became too heavy for the government to carry. The government reportedly tried to offer a middle ground, offering to just change its cabinet portfolio. But student leaders, as well as the students who were protesting on the streets, stood their ground. They said there is no deal, total resignation or nothing. And guess what? The youth won. A rarity in India in these times. This wasn't your older siblings' protest. Gen Z didn't just show up with long, boring speeches. You must have not heard any long speech at all. They showed up with pure, unfiltered internet sarcasm. Look at some of the most viral handwritten placards seen from Jantar Mantar to Chandigarh, to Mumbai, to Bengaluru, to Jaipur, to Kolkata, to all the cities where we saw protests happen. You can't gaslight an entire generation. Our futures are leaking faster than your group chats. We are students, not your target practice. Resign, refresh, and clear your cache. And the absolute peak of political satire? A student at Jantar Mantar literally brought a printed resignation letter for the minister to sign. Savage. He believed that the education minister could not do it on his own. This movement wasn't one on primetime TV channels. It was completely one on Instagram. Gen Z turned their distracted online habits into tactical weapons. What worked for them? The meme fluency. Complex education policy failures and paper leak scams were turned into hilarious 15-second reels, and I have doom scrolled this literally. The infographic army, clean aesthetic slides on Instagram, broke down systemic corruption so simply that even a middle schooler could understand it. That's the beauty of communication, making the middle schooler understand or even a preschooler understand what you're trying to say. Real-time broadcasts. Organizers bypass mainstream media entirely. They use broadcast channels to mobilize flash mobs across Mumbai, Delhi, Indore, and Hyderabad instantly. Of course, the algorithm. By flooding feeds with protest music, memes, and mirth, they forced the global algorithm to put the Indian education crisis on the world stage. If you want to understand why the minister had to pack his bags, you have to learn to decode the lingo of the streets, of the Gen Z. Let's break down the vocabulary that shook the administration. The system is cooked, meaning the exam machinery is completely ruined, charred, and beyond simple repair. Pure corruption, no cap. No cap means no lie. The youth are calling out facts and no filter as well. He fumbled the bag. Pradhan had one job: protect the integrity of competitive exams. He dropped it entirely. He fumbled the bag. We are standing on business. The students refused to stay quiet until accountability was delivered. So, what do you think is happening next? Next was the announcement of Prahlad Joshi, who stepped in as the new education minister. And since then, that has also been in the eye of the storm as the parliament resumes again. The CBI is currently investigating the NEET irregularities, but the real story here is the massive sea of youth celebrating at Shivaji Park on Sunday the resignation of the education minister. This proved that the internet generation isn't just chronically online. When they log on and step out, they can literally shift national politics. A certain Madam Member of Parliament described the Gen Z protesters as Generation Gutter. But ask any of them what they feel about it, they call it her hate sing. Now you'll ask me, what is hate sing? Where a person you hate intensely, not because they deserve such hatred, but because they serve as a focus for your general hatred. A healthy way to dispense with excess animosity which they believe she carries in her heart. What do you think about this Gen Z victory? Is the education system finally healing? Or is this just the beginning of something more to come? Now let's look at the history of student protests in India. This wasn't the first, but this definitely got something which was a first: the resignation of a sitting union minister. Governments build walls, they write laws, they command police forces, they believe they control the narrative. But history tells us there is one force a state can never truly contain: an organized campus. When the youth rise up, the state trembles. It is a classic battle: the status quo versus the future. Every major shift in India's political history didn't start at a ballot box. It started with students demanding accountability. Today, I'll trace the narrative of youth-led defiance and the brutal, often desperate ways governments tried to push back. Let's get straight to it. Let's go back to 1965. The central government issued a decree. Hindi would be the primary official language. To the bureaucrats in Delhi, it was just a policy. But to the students in Tamil Nadu, it was an existential threat to their careers and their identity and all that they stood for. What did the youth do? They didn't write letters. They shut down the state for 2 months. The government's immediate response was force. But the students didn't break. They forced the absolute capitulation of the central government, securing English as an associate language. More than that, the students permanently shattered the Congress party's dominance in Tamil Nadu, altering the state's political landscape forever. That is the power of the youth. It began with engineering students in Gujarat protesting something as simple as a hostel mess fee hike, a fee hike that proved too costly for the state government. The government ignored them. Big mistake. That minor spark exploded into Nav Nirman Andolan, sweeping across the state against inflation and corruption. Simultaneously, while Nav Nirman Andolan was going on in Gujarat, the Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti rose up. Legendary leader Jai Prakash Narayan saw the fire in these students and he weaponized it, calling for Sampurn Kranti, total revolution. Think about the state's response here. The government was so utterly terrified of this student-led mass mobilization that it panicked. It didn't just deploy police, it declared the 1975 national emergency to save itself. You would have heard of it umpteen times by the Bharatiya Janata Party accusing the Congress government. But this is a reality of history where emergency was imposed. When a government has to suspend democracy just to silence students, you know who holds the real power. The narrative of youth power isn't just about quick bursts of anger. It is about relentless grit. Look at the Assam agitation. For 6 agonizing years, the All Assam Students Union stood on the front lines against the state, demanding the deportation of undocumented immigrants. 6 years of state crackdowns, curfews, and disrupted governance. Yet, who blinked first? The state. In 1985, the Prime Minister had to sit down with student leaders to sign the historic Assam Accord. Now let's move to 1990, which I will detail in my next segment, but it is an important part of the students' movement. The anti-Mandal protests. When the government implemented a 27% reservation for OBCs in central jobs, the youth across erupted in the northern campuses. The response was a brutal clash of ideologies and state force. The desperation was so raw that students even attempted self-immolation on live television. It forced a complete, irreversible realignment of Indian public discourse and social politics. The youth rewrote the political rules of engagement. And that brings us to the present. The year is 2026. The place is Jantar Mantar. Once again, the youth have been pushed to the edge. Repeated paper leaks, broken recruitment systems, compromised exams, and an absolute vacuum of institutional accountability. The system told them to stay quiet and trust them. Trust me, bro, and trust the process. The youth said, no, thank you. Students from every corner of India had converged on the capital, executing brutal hunger strikes and weaponizing art to expose the systemic failure. Look at the government's response initially. Earlier, it was a very peaceful protest. The minute the Delhi police stepped in, they brought violence along with them. First, there was stonewalling. It was totally ignoring the student protests. And when some police blockades and shutting down metro stations to stop the crowds came in, we saw violence erupt. But the sheer velocity of the student voices could not be suppressed. It forced the national attention, deep administrative panic, and an ongoing reckoning within our entire educational machinery. The state tried to protect its institutions, the youth forced transparency. The issues change over decades. It could be over a language, it could be over corruption, it could be over quotas, it could be about exam leaks, but the narrative arc is identical. Governments always try to enforce compliance through institutional power, and the youth always answer with the power of disruption. The campus is not a quiet room of submission. It is the ultimate watchdog of our democracy. When the system fails, the media fails, the youth do not wait for the next election. They bring the change themselves, as you saw it as recently as last week. Like I mentioned, I would go back to the 1990 protests, the anti-Mandal protests that broke out on all student campuses, with over 60 students dying in the protest and over 200 trying self-immolation. That I also believe that particular student protest led to a change of how education works in India and how youth looks at education towards India. A personal anecdote. My own husband at that time was a student at IIT Delhi. He remembers that he participated in the protest at that point in time, and he was also detained for it. And I would say from that perspective, it is very important to see what really changed, how the trajectory of India's education system and youth movement works. So on August 7th, let's go back to August 7th, 1990, Prime Minister VP Singh announced the immediate implementation of the Mandal Commission report. And that moment, instantly, India split down the middle. To supporters of VP Singh and his government, it was historic social justice, breaking a monopoly on power. To critics, it was a political vote bank trick that murdered academic merit. Overnight, college campuses became active war zones. Students did not just protest with signs, they used fire. A government fell. Our democracy changed forever. Tonight, in this deep dive into Mandal quotas and the youth revolt, let's get straight to it. Go back to 1979. The government appointed BP Mandal to study India's backward classes. What was the report conclusion? Over 52% of India belonged to OBCs, yet their presence in government jobs was almost invisible. Mandal recommended a 27% reservation quota for OBCs in all central jobs and public universities. Add that to existing quotas for SC and ST, and the reserve pool hit 49.5%. Almost half of all open seats vanished. For 10 years, successive prime ministers buried the report to prevent a civil war. But in 1990, fighting an internal party rebellion, VP Singh pulled the lever on Mandal to survive. The status quo was shattered. The youth response was immediate, raw panic. In 1990, there was no tech boom. A government job or central university seat was the only ticket to the middle class. Elite campuses across northern India erupted. Students blocked highways, stopped trains, and shut down cities. The youth screamed, "This is an assault on capability." The state fired back. "This is correction of historic discrimination." Then came September 1990. In Delhi, a 20-year-old student named Rajiv Goswami poured kerosene over himself and struck a match on live television. He survived, but he sparked a terrifying chain reaction. Across India, over 200 young students attempted self-immolation. 60 died of their burns. It was a horrific, unprecedented standoff between the youth and the state. How did the government respond? With unyielding, iron-fisted survival. They deployed paramilitaries and enforced curfews. But the political bleeding was fatal. By November, just 3 months later, while VP Singh stuck to his guns, his coalition government collapsed under the weight of this chaos. The battle moved to the courts. In 1992, the Supreme Court upheld the 27% quota but added the creamy layer rule to bar the wealthy from the benefits. The fire of 1990 died down, but it permanently fractured Indian politics into identity-driven voting blocs. Decades later, as a new generation sits at Jantar Mantar, fighting for institutional transparency over exam leaks, the core lesson of Mandal remains: the campus is the ultimate watchdog of the Indian state. Now to another burning issue across the country, the E20 fuel. Have you noticed your car or scooter pulling a bit less lately? Are you visiting the petrol pump more often, even though your driving habits haven't changed? You aren't imagining things. There's a silent transition happening right inside your fuel tank, and it is hitting your wallet. It is called the E20 petrol. Let's break down the science simply. E20 is a blend of 80% regular petrol and 20% ethanol. Ethanol is alcohol made from sugarcane and food grains. The government and oil companies are pushing this hard. On paper, it sounds like a massive win-win. Saves foreign exchange because India imports most of its crude oil. Blending local ethanol saves billions of dollars. Lowers carbon emissions, it burns cleaner than pure fossil fuels, reducing tailpipe pollution. Supports farmers, it creates a massive market for sugarcane growers. It sounds like a perfect green solution, right? But here is the part they left out of the grand announcement. Here is the analytical truth. Ethanol has lower energy density than petrol. It simply packs less punch. So when you pump E20 into your vehicle, your fuel efficiency drops by roughly 6% to 10%. Critics note you're paying the same price for less energy density. It gets worse for anyone driving an older vehicle. If your vehicle was manufactured before 2023, it was likely not built for E20. Ethanol is highly corrosive and attracts moisture. This leads to rusted fuel tanks, rotted rubber tubes, and clogged fuel injectors. In fact, an Indian consumer court recently ordered a manufacturer to replace a vehicle damaged by E20 fuel incompatibility. They are challenging that order. This is no longer just a technical debate. It has exploded into a massive public controversy. Following recent student protest successes in India, a powerful citizen-led movement has emerged online under the banner E20 Janata Party. This group has amassed hundreds of thousands of followers in just days. They aren't demanding an end to green energy. They are demanding consumer rights. They aren't saying stop your E20 process. They're asking for E10. They're also asking for the absolute freedom to choose 100% unblended petrol at the pumps, transparent labeling on fuel dispensers so consumers know what they're buying, a 20% price discount on E20 fuel to offset the loss in vehicle mileage. So how is the government responding? By essentially looking the other way, which has become the norm. The Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and union ministers maintain that E20 is safe and there is no verified data showing widespread engine failures. Yet the government simultaneously admitted it does not actively track vehicle complaints or consumer repair costs. The denial is actively fueling a firestorm. Public interest litigations have reached the Supreme Court. Political leaders are demanding the resignation of the road transport minister. Activists have announced a massive Gadi March vehicle rally in New Delhi, and transport unions are threatening nationwide strikes. With over 75% vehicles on Indian roads not built to handle E20 fuels safely, forcing this transition without consumer choice is transforming into the country's next major public uprising. We all want a cleaner environment, but a green transition cannot be built on corporate secrecy and broken engines. Consumers deserve a choice, not a mandate that leaves them stranded by the roadside. Check your vehicle manual, know what you're putting in your tank. Don't let your wallet burn to fuel a flawed policy. If you'd want to participate or understand what really is happening, please leave a comment below and we will keep you posted and updated. That's all from me today on Straight Talk with PC.